last week in the Monday Open. I think because Labor Day in the Illinois Open, where I was playing. So because of that, there's no games to go over. So instead, I'm going to go over a couple of my games from the under 2100 section of the Illinois Open. So this first game I'm going to go over was from round 2, and I had the black pieces. Both me and my opponent had won our first game, and kind of the fun part of playing one of these weekender tournaments is you have more of an opportunity to prep for your opponent. And I saw online that he played the Scotch, but that's all I knew. So I prepped all going to the game for the Scotch, and we got a Scotch, but we got a Scotch Gambit, which I had basically zero prep for. The mainline Scotch would be knight takes d4. So that I spent all my time basically prepping for that. Bishop c4 I'm very familiar with. One of the Chicago Chess Center's oftentimes player, Megan Chen. Me and her have had many battles in this line. We've probably had like 3 classical games in this line. So yeah, I have a decent amount of experience against it. So the fact that I didn't prepare specifically for this game, I wasn't too worried. So knight f6, putting immediate pressure on the pawn. And black can go like full gambit mode, and this is a pretty legitimate line where black just ends up material, but not for too long. Black will get it back with this nice trick, knight c3, exploiting the pin. And there's theory here. Black is very comfortable. So white went for the main line. Interestingly enough, like just a week or two ago at the Sinkfield Cup, we had this actually exact variation that it was Wesley So played this against Notre Beca Satorov on his quest to win the Sinkfield Cup. So even though it's pretty rare to see it at the top level, it can show up from time to time. So d5, which is the main move, counter striking against the bishop, right? Oh. And bishop e5, knight e4, knight takes, so white gets their pawn back. And we get this trait. So we get this structure where white has ruined our structure, but given up the bishop pair. But in so doing, like c5 ends up being incredibly weak, and a lot of the play will revolve around that square in particular. So castles, bishop c5, pressuring the knight, f3. So white basically has 2 main options here: either the immediate bishop e3, or they can get an basically f4 for free before playing bishop e3. So the pros and cons of both is that if you still had the pawn back on f2, this bishop would be more stable, but white is getting their attack going on the king side. Wait, let me get my mouse really quick because I keep making this mistake every time. But let's see. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, so yeah, this can get pretty scary. Like white will either go for an eventual e6 or an eventual f6, both of which will be, with the rook already on the pretty active f file. It can be a little bit scary for black. And I go for queen b8, which, if you look in any of the databases, is not one of the main moves, but it actually scores incredibly high. And it's a pretty unique maneuver. So the idea is we pressure b2, which is currently undefended, and we're maneuvering our queen to potentially to b6, where we can put a lot of pressure now on this open diagonal towards the white king. And so the main moves here are either knight c3 or knight d2. You can also see b3, but this is a little bit weakening to especially the c3 square. So regardless of whether knight c3 or knight d2, it should transpose into this position. So now you can see, I mean, black's pawns are pretty terrible, but at the end of the day, we have activity and we also have the bishop pair, and so that's what black is kind of relying on. White will still have like a pretty strong attack with these f and e pawns, and the black queen is a little bit misplaced, so the rooks can kind of harass black's queen. So white will try to take advantage of that as well. Queen d2, trying to pave the way for either of the rooks to come to b1. Rook d8, just lining up with the queen. And yeah, my opponent played queen f2, which has been played, but it's quite a bit of a sideline. The main moves are bring one of the rooks to b1, in which case you see something like queen a3, queen a6, or queen a5 after the rook would come to b3.
Is there a reason you don't take the pawn on a2 there if rook?
Actually, no. If you go rook b1, you do take.
Okay.
But if you go rook fb1, then obviously you can't. Yeah. So yeah, queen d2 also protects his bishop. So before in this position, this knight was slightly pinned. Like it couldn't just go back to f3 because then you just drop the bishop. So that's another benefit of queen d2. Rook d8 lining up with the queen, and yeah, queen f2. So now pins against this bishop are lessened. And yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking here. And the move that you want to play is queen c3, but I wasn't so sure about knight f5. Basically, trying to take advantage of this tension, right? And I thought basically this would sort of force takes and takes, because otherwise this knight is hitting on g7. Because I didn't want to give up my bishop here, but what I had kind of missed is that actually this queen doesn't have many good squares to go to, and black starts getting a lot of pressure. And in fact, even though we have opposite colored bishops, a very common theme is that, you know, the opposite colored bishops can be drawish in an endgame, but in middle games, or even in an endgame, they aren't necessarily drawish if there's other pieces on the board. As long as you have major pieces on the board, these opposite colored bishops are actually, it helps the attacking side. The point being that, say for example, g2, which is a light square, I have the capability of attacking that square with my light squared bishop, but a dark squared bishop is not capable of defending that square, so it can make it difficult for the defending side to cover, in this case, the light squares, right? So yeah, I had missed that, so that's why I hadn't played the more natural queen c3, just again trying to put some more pressure on this bishop on e3. And I tried to prepare queen c3 by dropping my bishop back to b6. Now if the knight moves, my bishop is defended, and I don't have to worry about hanging the bishop on c5. So king h1, this is very slow. I mean, white should really get on with some kind of attack, right? Like something like f5, a4, a5. Yeah, like white needs to drum up some kind of play against black. King h1. Okay, such that potential pins that may or may not, but like the pins aren't really an issue when you have both the queen and the bishop on this file, right? Or on this diagonal. So king h1 was very slow. Queen c3, going for that main idea. And now I castle. And yeah, so knight b3. I was familiar with this idea. Actually, Megan had played it once against me. The main idea of knight b3 is that white is trying to take advantage of what I mentioned earlier, this very weak c5 square. would be a nice maneuver. And this is actually a very common break in this opening. And you'll see this idea also very... you'll see this exact break actually also in the French, where black also plays f6 against the strong e5 pawn. And yeah, oftentimes in chess, when you want to break up your opponent's pawn chain, you either want to attack the base of the pawn chain or the head of the pawn chain. So in this case, attacking the head of the pawn chain. Especially now without the knight on d4, white can't get away with e6 because I can just take. So it actually becomes difficult for white to maintain this pawn on e5. So white took, and here I was slightly inaccurate. I took with the queen on g5, on f6, sorry. Trying to eventually pressure this f4 pawn with ideas of g5, which is, I was fixated on this, but in fact, like rook f6 would have been much more accurate, because then I can think about just completely owning the d file with rook d6, and I shouldn't be so fixated on trying to win this pawn, but with the only, okay, technically the b file is open, but it's not really of material value as my bishop pretty much completely blocks off the b file. So for all intents and purposes, the d file is the only relevant file. And white's never going to want to trade on the d file, because then he'll fix my structure, right? Right now, the entire value of, you know, white's position is basically the fact that I have these two terrible isolated pawn islands. And if not for that, like black would be much, much better. So rook f6 would have been a little bit more accurate, but okay, queen f6, I'm still fairly comfortable. And here this is a very, very bad decision by white. So white's thinking that they're winning the pawn on e4, which is true, but it's something that even intuitively I wasn't really looking at, because now the main problem with my position was how terrible the c5 square was and how terrible my pawn structure was. And white just solved all of my problems. My bishop is going to become a complete beast with all my pawns on dark squares. This is going to be a major problem for white. And white's knight is kind of out of the game, actually. Like, it doesn't have any really great squares, so it's going to take a while before the knight can really reroute to the king side and be of any actual use. So even though white has restored material equality, in fact they've just, instead of being at a material deficit with positional advantages, now they're just, okay, material equality, but all the positional advantages are held by black.
And if they're wanting to move the knight, they'd have to move the rook or the queen first, right?
Yeah, I mean, if like say knight here immediately, it's just immediately gonna lose a pawn actually, because of bishop f5 just hangs c2.
Is there a reason you wouldn't take the rook there on a1?
Oh, that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. The knight is also responsible for the rook on a1 for the time being.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to make sure that it's finished.
Yeah. White played rook a1, preventing my main idea of bishop c6, because then that just hangs material, right? So because the ideal square for this bishop was c6 and I can't play it immediately, I really should have been thinking more about bishop f5. It's the more natural square for the bishop, and this pawn will remain weak, but at least I get to pressure c2. So that would, but I was kind of fixated on, ever since I took on f6, I was kind of fixated on trying to win this f4 pawn, and I did it without any real concern for my king safety, and we'll see how that made my life much, much more difficult during this game. So I played king h8, the point being that I want to play g5 immediately, but that just runs into queen g3. If we take, there's no real way for me to enter the position, I just lose a pawn. So the fact that white can pin my pawn is the main issue. That's why I sidestepped first with king h8. He put h3, and now I really want to get g5 in part also not just to win the pawn, but now I have ideas of once I win the pawn of playing f3, trying to break up their kingside structure, and h3 becomes a real weakness with my bishop staring at the h3 pawn. So h3, g5, and I do win the pawn. Yeah, and this is the game continuation. In fact, I should have traded first. Again, this pawn is going to remain weak. And now, as we'll see during the game continuation, the bishop not being loose on d7 will be fairly valuable. And then it's going to become too much for white to guard both the weaknesses on f4, c2. So oftentimes in chess, like the main thing is actually be patient. Your opponent's weaknesses should, if they're static weaknesses, they'll be there for a decent amount of time. I've talked in the past about dynamic versus static advantages. The weakness on f4 is basically a static advantage. I mean, it's going to be very, like, white's not ever going to want to play g3 to make f4 stronger. So patience is key, but yeah, I rushed a bit with g5, g takes f5, rook d1 takes, rook takes, and now I'm pitching a pawn. White gets this fork in on the bishop, but now at least I've gotten my pieces to sort of their optimal squares. Already, actually, one move prior, and this comes with the threat of queen takes h3 because of the pin against g2. White gets out of that. Now I have too many threats. I'm able to win a pawn. My opponent was able to at least complicate things with rook f8, which kind of forces queen g3, takes. Okay, now we enter a new phase of the game. So this is the real end game. And we have 1v1 on the king side, and I have a 3v2 on the queen side, right? The problem is that my king is very weak. It'll be subject to many checks from the white queen. And one other thing to note is that I'm pressuring checkmate, and so white is kind of tied down to guarding g2. So my main idea here is that my king is weak because I don't have many pawns around my king to give me shelter. So if I could pick up my king and put it anywhere on the board, I would put it over on g7. Then it's totally safe. There's nothing that white can really do to get at my king position. And so what I'm trying to orchestrate is some kind of king walk to get my king to its ideal square. So first, I cover the diagonal, protecting me from some checks. And slowly walking my king over. Okay, queen d3 was pressuring h7. And this was the moment of the game where I could have made my life just infinitely easier. The point is that now the queen is pressuring c7, h6. The queen is very annoying. What I want to play is queen g7, but that runs into queen f5, and then there starts being queen c8. It's also very annoying. The real star move would have been queen g5. Queen g5 again threatens checkmate, so white doesn't have time to take on c7, and white can give one single check. But once I move my king out of the way, then there's no more good checks. Like eventually, my king will find shelter, right? And if white's not getting checks, then white's going to have to retreat to cover g2, and only then can I really start walking my king over. So queen g5 would have been nice because, as we'll see, yeah. Okay, I played instead of queen g5, I played queen d6, just trying to cover all my base points. But check, check, check. Okay, I have to block. And yeah, this is a very annoying move. I cannot escape into my little pawn shelter. Again, a very annoying move. During this. And yeah, this is a bit of a mistake. This again goes to this idea of patience, right? I'm trying as hard as I can to get my king over to g7, b7. And c6 blocks this, but again, I weaken my pawn structure, specifically this b6 pawn, which white immediately goes for counterplay against. For reference, black can kind of just chill. Like, you don't need to make progress right away. And in fact, I can cover that diagonal with ideas of getting my bishop to e4, which I hadn't really considered during the game, but your bishop is a long-range piece. It can cover this diagonal. It doesn't have to be right next to your queen or anything. So, yeah, bishop g6, bishop h4, which would have been a much more accurate idea. c6, a4. My opponent's getting real counterplay here. And yeah, now they've completely opened up my king, and in fact, I'm basically immediately busted with, not busted because I'm not losing, but my winning chances are basically gone after queen e3, forking c5 and e8. Luckily, my opponent, I mean, we were both in time pressure, played queen c3, and from here on out, it's fairly smooth. Because now I just have two connected pass pawns, which in the queen and pawn endgame is going to be too much, because with one pawn you don't get too much shelter. With two pawns, your king can. With two pawns and the queen around, you'll be able to find enough shelter for the king to escort the pawns to promotion. So I'm able to win the pawn, and then yeah, my opponent just wandered here, walking into a pin, forcing the queen trade, and then my opponent swiftly resigned. So yeah, this game really highlighted that basically I wasn't playing with enough patience, and you know, you can have, if you have a good position, if you have a really tight grip on the position, you should make slow improving moves. Don't try to win immediately. So that's one good lesson from the game. So that's the first game I wanted to go over. I'll quickly go over one of my more interesting games from the tournament. So I was playing on board 2, which meant that actually this game was broadcast live on Lichess, which was kind of cool. Except for the fact that I lost this game. But my opponent, yeah, so my preparation for my opponent, he mostly played e4 online and played a little bit of d4, but the d4 that he did play was in the Kali system, which involves playing like e3, bishop d, not c4, bishop d3, knight f3, etc. So it's a very kind of tame, solid opening. But instead, he goes for this g3 step. So already my preparation was basically pointless for this opponent. So okay, we're going to get a game of chess. And yeah, this is a very standard position if white goes for c4 here, right? Then you have a very normal symmetrical Grunfeld, and there's a lot of theory in that position. My opponent goes for b3, going for this double fianchetto setup. And yeah, I hadn't looked at this position in quite a while. I didn't really remember any specific theory. And yeah, if your opponent plays something that's not super critical and you don't remember like all of the theory, like don't stress out, just play normal logical moves. So I play c5, logical, just contesting the center, bishop e2, knight c6, d takes c5, queen a5, knight d2, queen takes c5. So, yeah, I've obtained like a pretty normal position. My pieces are well placed. And I've been playing quickly, so my opponent is, if you look at the times, these are rough estimates. It's based off of my opponent put them into the tablet that we were using. But you can see that he has used already like 25 minutes of his time or so, and I've used about 2 minutes. So that's just about being practical. Time became a very big issue in this game as the middle game got very complex and both of us had to take quite a bit of time. Yeah, so my opponent played c4, which was the move I was expecting, but also one that I wasn't sure what I was going to play against when it came. And I figured I would just think about it when it came over the board. So really, black has 3 main options as far as I saw it. You can either take, which white will either go for rook c1, knight c4, one of the two. You can play rook d8, just maintain the tension. Or you can play d4 and grab space. These are basically the 3 main options. Yeah, rook d8 just seemed a little bit too tame. Like, black shouldn't have any problems here. Even though we traded off our dark squared bishops, the dark squares around the king are not that weak, especially with the pawn back on e7. And also being attacked on the dark squares is a little bit less likely now that, you know, black had to waste a lot of tempi developing the bishop just to do so. So this is a fairly standard idea that black isn't really too worried about trading the dark squared bishops in these kind of positions. But I was the higher rated opponent and this is fairly dry. And so this felt a little bit like too easy for my opponent to draw. And yeah, kind of a similar idea with, you can see, like, white's pieces are well developed. Yeah, I can get in rook d8, but after queen c1, like, white will be able to challenge on the c and d files. Black doesn't have anything too special here. d4 is the most ambitious. Black is grabbing space in the center. And I spent a little bit of time. You can see I spent, looks like 12 minutes on the clock. And I basically just have to make sure that, you know, if you don't want to overextend, and just make sure that this pawn can be maintained. So with great space comes great responsibility. Yeah, and I saw this idea of knight e1 before I played d4, and I had prepared this idea. So yeah, white goes queen c1, trying to skewer my queen to my rook. So already sidestepping it. And so I have this very strong pawn duo. The main issues are that I do have this pull on e4, and then also I have less control on all these squares that are left behind the pawns, which white tries to take advantage of. And yeah, white made it kind of interesting with this idea. So my initial plan was to play b6. Notice that the queen defends the knight. But yeah, once I had gotten to this position, I realized that my opponent's idea is to stick the knight on d6. And this is one of those cases actually where sometimes it's okay to let your opponent put a knight on a square like d6, where it's very invasive. But usually you can actually kind of play around this. I was a little scared to do so, so I didn't go for it. Instead, I was trying to get more control over this d6 square by playing bishop f8. Especially because now that my pawns are on e5 and d4, the shorter term prospects of this bishop on this diagonal is a bit lessened. I think this is a bit of a mistake. Just because, again, A, control of d6 is not as fundamental as I had thought, and B, g7, this bishop, even though it's blocked by pawns on e5 and d4, it has a lot of long-term potential. Right, the long-term potential being that I can expand with f5, e4, and eventually d3. So yeah, the bishop should have stayed on this diagonal. But okay, bishop f8, knight e4, knight trade, which isn't too bad. I have to play king b7, just covering the threat of the fork on my pieces. Yeah, and white places move c5, which actually our structure is basically a Benoni in reverse. So if you can imagine the board flipped, it's very common for black in the Benoni to play c4 to get a grip on d3. So white does the exact same thing. So white is basically playing the black side of a Benoni. I mean, that's the structure that we have. And goes for this c5 to clamp down and get knight d6. I play a5. This has 2 points to it. One, I'm preventing b4, solidifying this c5 square. Also, if the knight ever comes to d6, I'll have ideas of taking and blocking the bishop from protecting the d6 square so that I can potentially pick it up. So a5 supports knight b4, also prevents b4. Rook d1, bishop g4. This is the clock times don't show up here because there was a malfunction in the broadcast, but I spent a lot of time. I probably spent over like 10 minutes on bishop g4. This is just bad practical decision making. I mean, bishop g4, the point is I'm developing with tempo on e2, and I want to be able to perhaps play like something like queen e6 or queen e7, form a battery, trade off this very strong, annoying bishop on g2. But it shouldn't have taken me that long to do that. I wasted way too many minutes. King f1, guarding e2, queen e6, knight g5. And this is classic case of, this is what the kind of thing when people say that an attack is artificial, this is what they're talking about. It's about one move threats that can easily be parried. White attacks my queen, I can just step out of the way. White attacks f7, I can just guard it, right? White can actually technically add one more attacker, but without getting too deep in the weeds, this would actually just not be good because, sorry, not in this position, sorry. Yeah, in this position would actually just not be good because take, h6, knight f3, and then already, at minimum, I will have perpetual ideas. But this is a very good exchange sack. So, yeah, I mean, again, h3, one move threat, just step out of the way. And eventually, when an attack is artificial, you can then push your opponent's pieces back. So now I'm pretty well developed. Really, it's just a matter of this bishop on f8 and this d6 square. We're still kind of fighting over this square. And yeah, again, without getting into too much of the details. Okay, e4. This I do want to talk about. And so it looks like I'm hanging b7 once the knight came into d6. And this is something that you're going to have to get used to doing as you get better at chess. But you need to find tactical refutations to allow your positional ideas to come through. So positionally, I want to play f5, e4, d3, this kind of thing. But it looks like by playing f5 that actually I'm just hanging this pawn before I'm in time to play e4. But actually, white is not capable of playing this because I can remove the defender of the queen, right? Now the queen is hanging, and this just wins a piece. Oh, then I win material this way by pinning the knight. So you have to constantly. So many of the tactics in chess never actually happen on the board, but they justify the play that you do otherwise. So e4, rook c1, and okay, this isn't perfect. Okay, bishop c4. This knight had been such a thorn in my side, and giving up the bishop pair when there still aren't a lot of open lines. This knight was a beast. You shouldn't be afraid to give up the bishop pair in such a situation. This also I want to talk about. Right now I'm running into worries of getting pressured along this diagonal, and so I went for this maneuver of bishop e7, bishop f6. Same amount of moves, but the king is actually just much safer on h7. So this is very inaccurate on my part, and we'll see how this comes into play later in the game. But bishop e7, bishop e2, bishop f6. Yeah, white is attacking. We're putting pressure on a5, but I could almost care less about the a5 pawn. Like right now, everything is happening in the center, and white is just about to get rolled over. So rook d8, a3, bishop e5, preparing my idea, which is, we'll see in a second. Queen c4, e3. So I'm undermining this pawn, or trying to. If white budges with that pawn, then the g3 pawn will fall. And I specifically prepared this idea so that if rook d3, I actually have this sacrifice on g3. The point is that if takes, then I'm threatening checkmate. And the only way he can avoid it would be to, first of all, you cannot play bishop here because of this. And yeah, after king h2, look at these passed pawns, look at the pressure that I have, and look how out of play all these pieces are. I didn't have to calculate any farther than here to know that this is just completely winning for black. So after I took, my opponent now saw the idea, obviously, and takes a knight, trying to remove a defender of the d4 square. But I'm in time to take on c6 with my queen because it comes with a checkmate threat. And so my opponent plays f3, bishop e5, rook a5 again. I don't care about that pawn at all. I'm just trying to get at my opponent's king. And yeah, this game is a lesson in clock management. Don't get into time pressure, because at this point I knew that I was completely winning, and then I just completely bungled it. In part because I got to this position in my head, and I originally thought I would go for queen f2, just trying to get queen f1 to take on e2. But I thought, okay, no, I'll take a pawn, which is slightly inaccurate, but I can hold on. And I had gone to it with the intention that when we would get to this position, this is the only way, by the way, rook e1, that white can defend the e2 pawn. I went into it with the intention of this nice tactic of playing d3, because if they take with the pawn, let's say, then even I can just play maybe not immediately. I can probably just play here, actually. It cuts off the queen. This is probably easiest. I'm just going to promote, basically. This is too much. This is too much for... already, this actually would just be checkmate. Yeah. If rook takes, again, it cuts off the queen from taking, and I can take on e2. And obviously the queen can't take... Oh, but the queen can take. Originally I missed this move because my rook... But actually, if I take with my rook, he takes with check. If my king had been on h7 in that other line, this wouldn't have been an issue. But as it is here, I'm just losing. And what's funny is that actually in this position I had a very simple win that I just missed over the board. But I can take the rook as it's defended X-ray through the queen that was on d3. And yes, they can win my bishop, but I would just be up in exchange here, still with a lot of pressure. It's a bit unfortunate that I just, and this is what happens when you get into time pressure. We're both under 5 minutes at this point, and we're almost out of time, so I'll try to go through the game quickly from here. But I just even here I'm still winning, but just completely panicked. We have a race across the board, which allows white to crash through in the center, and I had a win here. Again, a simple one, but with no time on the board, your adrenaline's running too high. This is just a sample line, but basically, white can't handle the pin, and this pawn will promote. And yeah, eventually, just making moves on increment, and you just miss a lot, and end up getting checkmated. So here I resigned. There's no way to stop checkmate next, other than just delaying for a few moves with something like Queen B1. So what would have been a very nice game, I mean, I was completely outplaying my opponent with this nice idea of crashing through back in this moment on G3. That was kind of the culmination of everything. In part due to my space and just rolling through in the center with G6, F5, E4, D4. Tactics are gonna happen when you have well-placed pieces and a lot of space. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that I played this way. Overall, the tournament went well. This is one of 2 games that I lost, but I won the other 5, so still a good tournament, but definitely would have liked to have won that one. So yeah, I kind of went through there without stopping for any breaks, but yeah, any questions about any of the positions during the game?
Was this the World Open?
This is the Illinois Open.
Oh, last weekend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, was this a King's game by chance?
No, this was a symmetrical, so I can quickly go back through the opening. It was a symmetrical Grunfeld.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, so, well, it would have been had my opponent played the main line with C4.
Isn't could you go back to move 3 real quick, please? Oh, I see. Isn't there like 1-9 where it's like that's fine. I'm not making something else.
Okay.
It's like G3, G6, and then like D5, E5. I don't know. It was
D5, like
where black, like where white commits G3, bishop G2, like doesn't go knight F3 immediately. I'm like.
okay, I don't know that one, but maybe.
You probably know more than I do.
But yeah, but he goes for this kind of double fianchetto setup, and that was sort of the way that we ended up in that position that we saw.
I'm with you.
Yeah. But yeah, any other questions?
Very interesting. Thank you for walking through this.
Yeah.
On the move where you went bishop E5 to go E3.
Yeah.
Could you have just gone E3 like immediately instead of bishop E5? Because you still have the same threat of E3 takes.
Yeah, but the thing is that bishop E3 here.
Oh, I see. Oh.
And then the point is that if I take, I'm not putting as much pressure on G3. Is sort of the
Okay, I'm with you. That makes sense.
Also in part because this rook is defending the square, but the
Is
point,
F4 not an option there though? Like takes F4. Like pawn takes, king takes F4 now.
yeah, this isn't so good because even just like
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
just something like this, yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, white's king is pretty open, but so is my king. And now my pawn on G4 is very weak.
I see. Okay, I'm with you.
And while when I have such a huge center and such a huge attack, I don't care so much about what's happening on the queen side. In a position like this, I very much care what's happening on the queen side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like there's a ton of pressure here. B4, eventually B5 once the queen moves. These pawns will start to really roll. While I won't be able to like drum up too much discomfort for black. Like maybe I can go queen here, but once the king will be pretty safe.
I see. Okay.
Once he's tucked away. So that's why I start with bishop g3, just because I saw this exact idea where rook d3, and that I would have this sack on g3.
Okay.
But I can't sack. I can't do queen takes d3, obviously, right?
Yes.
So that's why bishop e5. But yeah, how much better this position would be? I could have the exact same position as we have here, but with my king on h7 instead of g7.
Oh yeah, right.
Right,
Yeah.
and that tactic that I showed later, which didn't even work for white, because I had that queen takes rook move. But the fact that he had this intermezzo of taking the bishop on e5 with check would just all be avoided with king h7. So
I'm with you. Okay.
So that's another example of just, if you have an idea that doesn't, just because the execution of your idea isn't the best, doesn't mean there isn't a way to still get your same idea with a better execution. So while my idea was to get my bishop on this diagonal and eventually to e5, I did that with bishop e7, bishop f6. Better would have been king h7 and then bishop g7. It accomplishes everything the first thing does, but also gets my king to safety. So, yeah. And yeah, I guess that's it for today. So, good luck everybody on your Monday game, and please submit games for next week so that I can go over it.
Thank you, Sam.